Hello, welcome to the first of a series of interviews that I'm conducting with Tony Hurle, Canon Tony Hurle, as he prepares for his retirement in October of this year. Tony has, of course, been at St. Paul's for something just over 28 years by the time he leaves us in October. I think Tony has been ordained in the Church of England for something like 37 years. And what I'd like to do in this and some other interviews is to explore with Tony his life of faith, his early years, how he came to faith, how he came to St. Paul's, and really to look at those years at St. Paul's and see what Tony has learnt and to see how the church has changed and what the lessons are for each of us looking back over those years. But Tony, I want to start with a question, really, because you and I have known each other now for most of those 28 years, since Lynn and I first came to St. Paul's with our children back in the early 1990s. And I've always thought of you as being a very sociable person, a person who loves to be with people, loves conversations with people, learning about people. And here you are for the past, 5-6 weeks in lockdown, not being able to see people. How have you got on with that?
It's actually been good. I suppose, inevitably, because there are two of us here, that's been quite good. It's been quite busy doing things. I felt God sort of put on my heart to do the night prayer or the evening prayer and the night prayer. And it's been powerful doing that because the evening prayer was over Philippians. And I think Paul was in lockdown in prison. And there were certain things that sort of came out during that. So that's been positive. It's been, you have communications, don't you? If it hadn't had the internet and the telephone, how different it would have been. So Zoom chats and so we've had contact with people. So it's not been quite as isolated. I have tried to sort my study out a bit because I need to get the yardage of books down. So there's been that, and we need to downsize and sort out before we move. So there's been a bit more of that than there would have been otherwise, which has been a good thing.
Can I say, just looking at the shelves behind you, it's clear you've still got a way to go with thinning down the books and other things that you've got. What about missing your children and your grandchildren? How has that been?
That's hard, but again, we have Zoom chats and contact, and they're doing well, and they're both, in a way, it's been a good time for them, I think, with little children. So our eldest grandson is just over 3, and the youngest was just born before lockdown, which was good, so 3 months today. So it's been hard work for them, but we've been able to keep in touch, and WhatsApp and little videos, and then Zoom when you can see them has been good. And actually, I've just come off a Zoom chat now with John and Lizzie and Barney and Zachary in Ealing. So it's nice.
Do you think this period has perhaps helped you prepare for retirement? Because none of us expected that your last months in this role would be, spent in this way.
Yes, there have been losses, haven't there? We would have had things done over Easter. We'd have had Joe Moody come, and those won't happen in the same way. I feel God's at work in all this. And in a way, I feel very peaceful. It's the right time to retire. And there will be big changes in the church as to how we do things. And it's accelerated stuff. So I often think when we did the building, if you remember, the pigeonholes used to be totally stuffed before we went out. So we planned to have Rolls-Royce pigeonholes for when we came back in. But during that interval, partly accelerated by the interval, we moved to electronic media much more, and we emailed the rotors and things. So we've never used them. And I think we're in that same sort of period that lots is going to change. And I'm looking forward in a way to time to almost die to some of the old stuff in me and see what comes out the other end. I feel a confidence that there's new stuff, but I think it will be about probably Christians relating more outside church better, and I'll have the opportunity to do that. But also we may see a turning back to God. And one of the words that Joe Moody had for this season was mend your nets. And so I'm doing a bit of that. So it's been good in this time of lockdown. I've managed to diet a bit more, so that's been a good thing. And I feel getting food back into sort of control areas, because I think I've not been good at that. And I'm also doing this Mark Verkler course on emotions, and I think there's some of those, and they're perhaps linked, of a time of growth too.
Okay. I want to take you back in a sense. Later in the series, I want to ask you about the future, what your thoughts are coming out of St. Paul's and your future, your hopes for St. Paul's going forward in a way. But let me take you back to your childhood. I think you were brought up in Cockfosters, famous for being the end of the Piccadilly line.
That's right.
And in that home where you grew up, was there faith in the air? Was it a Christian home?
Oh, absolutely. But it was an interesting home because my mum had become a Christian through Crusaders and been very involved at All Souls Langham Place. In fact, she was secretary to John Stott in the Monday Club when he was a curate there. And Dad came from a Methodist background, but really became a Christian in London through the Brethren and was very converted to Brethrenism. Got, I think, tied up with his conversion to Christianity. So I grew up in this sort of Brethren-style home, but Mum had Anglicanism deep in her roots. And they also came from different social backgrounds. So my mum was from sort of, her dad was in the Bank of England and then managing director of a discount bank. And my grandfather was a wheelwright. So there were two quite different. So, and Dad sacrificed a lot. So I was sent to public school, but it was a very Christian home. But slightly, the Brethren were wonderful for their fellowship across all types of people. They were wonderful for their Bible knowledge. But we all think it's a bit funny that my biggest battle as a child was whether I could wear a coloured shirt on a Sunday. So it was quite sort of strict and somewhat dislocated from life as well.
Interesting. I remember you telling me once, Tony, that I think when you were about 6 or 7 years old, your father was mowing the grass outside and you had to call him in very urgently to tell him that you'd made a Christian commitment and you wanted to share that with him. And yet I can also remember you saying that you traced your proper Christian conversion, if that's the right word, to when you were at university so much later, so many years later. I wonder which of those turnings to faith were the most real for you.
I mean, I suppose growing up in that home, God was in the atmosphere, as you said, and so it was. I can remember asking my dad in, because I wanted to ask Jesus into my life, and him being very frustrated about giving up mowing and then changing, because obviously this was worth giving up mowing for just before the dart came. But then I think it was quite a dislocated upbringing in the Brethren and a bit in public school. And I certainly didn't stand as a Christian, but I also had lots of struggles with the faith as it was received, as it were, in Brethrenism. So, but I can remember at about 14, someone spoke, a chap called Wilf White, and I sort of said to God, if he comes past me, I want to talk to him, and he didn't. But I said, God, don't let me go. And when I went up to university, I wanted to make beginnings, and I joined the Christian Union. And it was a guy called Leslie Leppard, which I've never heard of before or since, who did the London University Freshers' Address, who spoke, and I became Christian there. And I suppose, probably in the modern jargon, that was a baptism of the Spirit experience. Certainly it was a wholehearted, I understood that it was, what I did, whether you marry or not, who you marry, the whole of life was given to God. And because I had this background, I was quite quickly then fully immersed in the CU and got on the committee within, that Easter and for the next 2 years and stuff like that. So it was then, as it were, all the jigsaw came together.
Which of those conversions, if that's the right word, was the most real for you, most powerful looking back? Was it the college conversion?
Yes, the college one, absolutely.
What can you remember changing about the Tony Hurle at that time?
Oh, masses, because I'd been quite I'd struggled at public school. I wasn't very good at rugby, and that was the currency at it, as it were. And I don't think I'd been in a good state either. And so I'd wondered when I was 16, 17, whether you'd fit into life. And actually, one of the ironies is some of the sort of rugby crew probably didn't fit into life because it was such a unreal life. So it was where I found myself. Becoming a Christian really sorted me out. It was funny, there was a friend of the family of my father's, whose daughter was at the same college, and she'd said to someone in the second year, look after Tony because he's going to go off the rails in a big way when he gets free from his family. And because I became Christian, I didn't, but I could have done, as it were. So it was a massive change. And I went to Westfield College in London, which is now closed, and it was only about 1,000 students. And that was a place where I grew up. We had friends. It was a really wonderful period for me. And doing biology, which I love too. So that was a place where I found myself and grew massively as a person as well as a Christian.
What would you say to parents bringing up children today if they want them to develop a Christian faith in the way that you were brought up in the faith in that home? What sort of advice would you give them, Tony?
I think it was funny because I think my parents would have looked back and said they did all sorts of things wrong. But one, they were absolutely committed to God. And so I think God honours that. And God was first in their life. And so I think this modelling of God being first, I think there was quite a lot in my home of then wanting me to conform. And I think that's probably can incur rebellion. So Lydia's been wonderful, I think, with our kids of trying to avoid rebellion at all costs, so that you model it and they can take it on, and you try and as much as possible by distraction and other means of sort of not forcing yourself into the sort of confrontations. And it's interesting, in the Bible, I was brought up with a dad who I think took it seriously, that he got to teach me and admonish me or correct me, not so much he hadn't got to make me angry. I don't think that sort of quite came into the scene. And yet in the Bible, those three are put together. And I just think that's quite an important sort of balance. So the question is this one of those situations where you fight the important battles and let it go and you don't anger the person? Or is it the time when it is helpful to say something or correct? And all three, and that's where I've come really to say you must listen to God. So I think the biggest thing is you being committed and modelling it, but secondly, listening to God for what to do in each situation. And for me, the prodigal son story really expands the register, because there's the father modelling, giving his son a lot of money to go wrong. And I don't think that was an iota of that in my father's mind, and I don't think there was much in mine. And you just think, the register of what God could ask us to do in helping our children is much wider than we might think. But it is the right thing at the right person to the right time, and that's what Jesus modelled.
Yes. Thank you, Tony. We're going to sort of draw stumps, to use a cricketing term, at this point. I think in our further interviews, we're going to talk about how you had the call to ordination, how you met Lydia, your first experience of Christian service in a church as an ordained minister, and then later on we're going to talk about the St. Paul's years and what has happened there. But at this point, thank you, Tony, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you very much for your time.
Great.